I thought I had become pretty good with money. By the time I turned 52, my bills were paid on time. I was no longer making the reckless financial choices I had made when I was younger, and I even had a budget written down. So I assumed that if money still seemed to disappear before the end of the month, it was simply because everything had become more expensive. But one Sunday evening, I set a timer for 15 minutes, opened my bank account, and discovered something that completely changed the way I managed my money. I found a streaming subscription I had forgotten about, a grocery delivery charge that had quietly become a weekly habit, 2 purchases for household items I already owned, and a utility bill that had increased 3 months earlier without me noticing. None of these expenses looked dangerous on their own. There was no dramatic shopping spree, no luxury vacation, no enormous emergency, just a collection of small leaks that had been draining money from my account while I was busy paying attention to everything else. And that was the moment I realized my budget was not failing because I lacked discipline. It was failing because I had stopped looking at it. I had been treating my budget like a document I created once a month. Instead of a system that needed regular attention, I would sit down at the beginning of each month, estimate the bills, assign money to groceries, transportation, savings, and personal spending, then close the notebook and hope real life followed the plan. Of course, real life never followed the plan exactly. Prices changed, unexpected expenses appeared, convenient purchases slipped in, and automatic payments continued without asking whether they still deserved a place in my life. By the time I noticed something was wrong, several weeks had already passed, and the money was already gone. What surprised me most was how quickly those 15 minutes gave me more clarity than hours of worrying had ever done. I did not need a complicated spreadsheet. I did not need to study every receipt from the previous month, and I did not need to punish myself for buying the wrong things. I simply needed to stop, look, and make 1 or 2 small corrections before the leaks became larger. That evening, I canceled the forgotten subscription, removed my payment information from the grocery delivery app, moved a small amount of money into the account that would cover the higher utility bill, and wrote down 3 items I was not allowed to buy again until I checked the storage closet. The entire process took less time than watching half an episode of televisions. Yet I immediately felt lighter, not because I had suddenly become wealthier, but because I finally knew what my money was doing. That feeling made me wonder what would happen if I repeated the same process every week, not as a punishment, not as an emergency meeting, but as a simple reset. 15 minutes to check what had happened, see what was coming next, catch anything unusual, and make one decision that would keep the rest of the month on track. I chose Sunday evening because it was usually quiet. I made a cup of tea, placed my notebook beside my phone, and promised myself that when the timer ended, I would stop. Even if everything was not perfect, I wanted the habit to feel small enough that I could continue it during busy weeks, tired weeks, and weeks when I did not feel like facing the numbers, because I had finally understood that avoiding my finances did not protect me from stress. It simply delayed the stress until the problem became more expensive. During the first few resets, I found something almost every time: a trial membership that was about to renew, a restaurant charge that reminded me how often I had been ordering food, a bank fee I could have prevented, groceries purchased without checking what was already in the freezer, and small online orders that had felt forgettable until I saw them lined up together. The leaks were not proof that I was irresponsible. They were proof that money can leave quietly when no one is watching. And at 52, I no longer wanted to spend my time wondering where it had gone. I wanted a system that showed me, while I still had time to do something about it. That 15-minute reset became the moment each week when I stopped letting money happen to me and started directing it again. And although the routine looked almost too simple to matter, it was about to reveal why every budget I had tried before had slowly fallen apart. For years, I believe the hardest part of budgeting was creating the plan. I would sit at the kitchen table at the beginning of the month with my notebook, calculator, bills, and a cup of coffee, then carefully decide how much should go toward groceries, transportation, household needs, savings, and everything else. When the numbers finally balanced, I felt responsible and organized, but that feeling usually lasted only a few days, because once the month began, I rarely looked at the budget again. I treated it like a set of instructions that real life was supposed to obey, and when real life did not cooperate, I assumed I had failed. The problem was not that I could not make a budget. The problem was that I expected one plan made on the first day of the month to remain accurate for the next 30 days. But money does not move in a perfectly predictable way. One week the grocery bill is higher because several basic items run out at once. Another week the electric bill changes. The car needs something small, a birthday appears on the calendar, or as I am too tired to cook and spend money on food I had not planned to buy. None of those things seemed serious enough to rebuild the entire budget, so I ignored them. And each small change pushed the original plan further away from reality. By the middle of the month, I often stopped checking altogether because I already suspected the numbers would disappoint me. I told myself I would start fresh next month, but starting fresh did not solve anything. Because I kept repeating the same pattern, I planned carefully, drifted gradually, avoided looking, and then blamed myself at the end. What I did not understand was that a budget is not a promise about what will happen. It is a working plan that needs to be adjusted as new information arrives. I had been measuring success by how perfectly I followed the original numbers, instead of asking whether the plan was helping me make better decisions. That difference changed everything, because perfection made me want to hide from mistakes, while adjustment gave me permission to correct them. Another reason my old budget kept failing was that it focused almost entirely on large categories. Rent, utilities, insurance, groceries, and savings were easy to see, but the quiet spending happened between those categories. It was the extra stop at the store, the small app purchase, the delivery fee, the coffee bought because I was already out, the item added to an online order just to reach free shipping. Each decision seemed too small to record, but together they created the gap between what I planned to spend and what actually left my account. I also underestimated the power of automatic payments. Once a subscription was connected to my card, it became almost invisible. I stopped making a conscious decision to pay for it. The decision was made for me every month, and because the amount was usually small, I did not feel enough pain to question it. The same thing happened with bills that slowly increased. I noticed the payment, but I did not always compare it with the previous month. So a few extra dollars here and there became part of my normal spending without ever being examined. Emotional spending was another leak. My monthly budget could not predict. I spent differently when I was tired, worried, bored, or overwhelmed. On difficult days, convenience felt more important than saving, and I would tell myself that one purchase would not matter. Sometimes it truly did not matter, but without a weekly check, I could not see when one exception had quietly become a pattern. The 15-minute reset helped because it shortened the distance between the decision and the review. Instead of waiting until the end of the month to discover that I had overspent, I could notice after a few days, while the details were still fresh and there was still time to change direction. If restaurant spending was higher than planned, I could cook from the freezer for the rest of the week. If a household category was running low, I could delay a non-essential purchase. If an unexpected bill appeared, I could move money before it caused an overdraft or ended up on a credit card. These were small adjustments, but they prevented the kind of financial damage that used to make me feel powerless. I began to see that money management was less like building a perfect machine and more like steering a car. You do not point the wheel once and then stop paying attention. You make tiny corrections as the road changes. Sometimes you move slightly left, sometimes slightly right, and most of the time the corrections are so small that no one else notices. But without them, you slowly drift away from where you intended to go. That was what my old budgets had been missing. Not more detail, not stricter rules, and not stronger willpower. They were missing a regular moment of course correction. Once I understood that, the 15-minute reset stopped feeling like another financial chore and started feeling like the maintenance that kept the whole system working. And the next step was turning those 15 minutes into a routine simple enough to follow every single week. Once I understood that my budget needed regular course correction, I built a 15-minute routine that was simple enough to repeat every week. I did not want another complicated system that looked impressive for 3 days and then disappeared into a drawer. I wanted something I could do when I was tired, busy, distracted, or not especially motivated. So I divided the reset into 5 small steps and gave each one only a few minutes. The first step was checking my current balances. I opened my checking account, savings account, and credit card app, then wrote down the numbers exactly as they appeared. I did not round them up, guess, or avoid the account that made me uncomfortable. This first glance told me where I actually stood, not where I hoped I stood, and that distinction mattered, because many of my old financial decisions had been based on a vague feeling that there should still be enough money available. The second step was reviewing the transactions from the previous 7 days. I moved slowly enough to recognize every charge, but quickly enough to avoid turning the reset into an investigation. I looked for purchases I had forgotten, fees I did not understand, subscriptions, duplicate charges, and spending that did not match the priorities I had set. I was not asking whether every purchase was good or bad. I was asking whether it was intentional. Sometimes I saw a restaurant charge and decided it had been completely worth it. Other times I saw 3 convenience purchases in 4 days and realized I had been spending from exhaustion rather than choice. The third step was checking what would happen before the next reset. I looked at my calendar, upcoming bills, appointments, birthdays, grocery needs, transportation costs, and anything else likely to require money during the next 7 days. This was the step that prevented the most surprises. Because a bill is rarely truly unexpected. When the date has been sitting on the calendar all month, I began writing recurring payments on one simple list, not only the large expenses, but also the smaller automatic charges that were easy to forget. Knowing what was coming allowed me to protect the money before I accidentally spent it. The fourth step was comparing my current spending with the weekly plan. I did not use dozens of detailed categories. I focused on the areas that tended to move the most: groceries, household spending, transportation, eating out, and personal purchases. If I had spent more than planned in one category, I did not immediately label the week a failure. I looked for a reasonable adjustment. Perhaps I could spend less on takeout, postpone a household purchase, use food from the pantry, or reduce the amount I planned to spend during the weekend. The goal was not to erase what had already happened. The goal was to keep one expensive decision from becoming an expensive month. The fifth and final step was choosing one action before the timer ended. This was important because awareness without action can become another form of procrastination. Sometimes the action was canceling a subscription. Sometimes it was transferring $20 into a sinking fund, moving money to cover a bill, returning an unnecessary purchase, writing a grocery list, or setting a reminder to call a service provider. I made sure the action was small enough to complete immediately or clear enough to schedule. When the timer rang, I stopped. Even if there were other things I could have analyzed, ending on time protected the habit from becoming overwhelming. I kept the tools simple: my phone, a small notebook, a pen, and a basic calendar. I did not need expensive budgeting software. Although an app could work just as well for someone who preferred it, the method mattered more than the tool, and the method was simply to look backward, look forward, compare, adjust, and act. In the beginning, I worried that 15 minutes would not be enough, but that limit forced me to focus on what actually mattered. I stopped trying to understand every financial decision I had ever made and started dealing with the few decisions that could still change the coming week. After several resets, I also developed a short list of questions that kept me from wandering. What left my accounts this week? What is due before next Sunday? Is there anything unusual? Which category needs attention? And what is one thing I can do right now? Those questions became the backbone of the routine. And because I answered them every week, I began noticing problems much earlier than before. A grocery category that was climbing too fast, a subscription I had not used, a utility bill that looked different, or a pattern of small purchases that revealed more than any single receipt ever could. The routine was not exciting, but that was part of its strength. It did not depend on inspiration, guilt, or a dramatic promise to change my life. It depended on 15 quiet minutes, repeated consistently, and those minutes were about to reveal just how many budget leaks had been hiding inside my ordinary habits. The more consistently I followed the 15-minute reset, the more I realized that most budget leaks did not look like financial emergencies. They looked ordinary, harmless, and easy to justify, which was exactly why they had survived for so long. The first major leak I noticed was subscriptions, not because I had dozens of them, but because several small charges had become invisible. One service cost less than $10, another was connected to an app I had used only twice, and one had started as a free trial that quietly converted into a monthly payment. Each charge seemed too small to worry about, but when I added them together, I was spending enough every month to cover part of a utility bill or make a meaningful contribution to savings. The reset forced me to ask a simple question: would I sign up for this again today? If the answer was no, I canceled it. Another leak came from convenience spending, especially on days when I had not planned well. A small delivery fee did not seem serious. A prepared meal from the store felt reasonable, and buying coffee while running errands seemed harmless. But the weekly review showed that convenience was not an occasional expense. It had become a pattern. I was paying extra because I was tired, rushed, or unprepared. And while I did not eliminate every convenience purchase, I became more selective about which ones truly improved my life and which ones simply drained money without giving me much in return. Grocery waste was another quiet leak. I had always thought of overspending at the grocery store as buying expensive food, but the real waste often came from buying ordinary food and failing to use it. I found vegetables pushed to the back of the refrigerator, duplicate pantry items, forgotten leftovers, and frozen food I had replaced because I did not remember it was there. During one reset, I compared my grocery receipts with what was still in the kitchen and realized I had purchased several things I already owned, not because I needed them, but because I had shopped without checking. After that, I started doing a quick refrigerator, freezer, and pantry scan before making the weekly list, and that one habit reduced both spending and waste. Online shopping created another type of leak because every purchase happened so quickly. I could think of something in the afternoon, order it in less than a minute, and forget about it before dinner. None of the items were especially expensive, but the reset placed those small orders next to one another, and seeing them grouped together was very different from seeing each one alone. I noticed how often I added an extra product to reach free shipping, even though spending more to avoid a smaller shipping charge made no financial sense. I also discovered that I sometimes purchased replacements before the original item had actually worn out, simply because the new version looked useful or more convenient. Bank fees were especially frustrating because they gave me nothing in return. I found a maintenance fee on an account I rarely used, a late charge caused by forgetting a due date, and a small interest payment on a credit card balance I had planned to clear earlier. These charges were avoidable, but only if I noticed them quickly, so I used the reset to update reminders, move due dates when possible, and make small transfers before problems occurred. Utility and insurance bills also deserved more attention than I had been giving them. Some costs increased gradually, only a few dollars at a time, and because I focused mainly on whether I could afford the payment, I did not question why it had changed. The weekly reset trained me to compare unusual amounts with previous statements, and sometimes that led to a phone call, a corrected error, a changed plan, or simply a better understanding of what I needed to budget. Household spending was another area where duplication appeared. I bought cleaning supplies, batteries, toiletries, and basic items because I could not remember what was already stored, then discovered another package hidden in a cabinet. The solution was not a complicated inventory system. I simply created a short list of the items I frequently overbought and checked it before shopping. What surprised me was that none of these leaks made me feel reckless while they were happening. Each purchase had a reasonable explanation, and that taught me something important. A budget leak is not always caused by irresponsibility. Sometimes it is caused by inattention, repetition, or a decision that made sense once but continued. Long after the need disappeared, I stopped using shame as a budgeting tool because shame made me want to close the banking app, while curiosity made me want to understand the pattern. Instead of asking, how could I waste money like this? I began asking, what made this expense easy to overlook? That question produced useful answers: poor planning, automatic renewals, emotional fatigue, disorganization, and the belief that small amounts did not matter. But small amounts mattered precisely because they repeated. $5 once was $5, but $5 every week became $260 a year. $15 every month became $180, and several small leaks together could quietly consume thousands over time. Once I saw that, I began redirecting the money rather than simply celebrating the cuts. Canceled subscriptions went toward a sinking fund, reduced delivery spending, strengthened my grocery category, avoided fees went into savings, and fewer impulse orders helped me make extra debt payments. The reset did not make me feel deprived. It showed me that money I thought I did not have was already present. It had simply been leaving through openings I had stopped noticing. And as those leaks closed, something else began to change. I started making different decisions before the money ever left my account. After a few weeks, the 15-minute reset started changing my decisions. Before I even sat down on Sunday evening, I became more aware of the small moments when money was about to leave my account. And for the first time, I could recognize a budget leak while it was forming instead of discovering it. Days later, when I opened a shopping app, I could almost imagine seeing the charge during the next reset, and that brief pause was often enough to make me ask whether I truly needed the item. I did not stop buying everything, but I stopped treating every passing desire like an instruction. If something was not urgent, I left it in the cart for 24 hours, and many times the excitement disappeared before the next day. What had felt necessary in the moment looked much less important after a good night's sleep. The same thing happened at the grocery store. Before the reset, I often walked in with only a general idea of what I needed, then allowed the displays, discounts, and cravings of the moment to build the final bill. Afterward, I began checking the refrigerator, freezer, and pantry before leaving home. I wrote a short list based on what was actually missing, and I planned several meals around ingredients I already owned. This did not make grocery shopping perfect, but it reduced duplicate purchases, forgotten produce, and last-minute takeout because there was nothing easy to cook. I also became more honest about the cost of poor preparation. When I forgot to pack water, bring a snack, or plan my errands, I was more likely to spend on convenience, so I began keeping a reusable bottle, a small snack, and a list of stops in the car. Combining errands saved fuel, reduced impulse visits to stores, and helped me avoid buying something simply because I was already nearby. Eating out changed too. I did not ban restaurants or tell myself I could never order food again. Extreme rules had never lasted for me. Instead, I decided which convenience purchases were worth the money before I was tired enough to make a careless choice. If I knew a busy day was coming, I planned a simple dinner, prepared something in advance, or set aside money for a meal I could enjoy without guilt. This made eating out feel intentional instead of accidental. The reset also changed the way I handled sales. I had once believed that buying something at a discount was automatically a smart decision. But the weekly review showed me that a cheap item I did not need was still wasted money. I started asking whether I would buy it at full price, whether I already owned something similar, and whether it would replace a planned purchase. If the answer was no, the sale stopped feeling like an opportunity. Subscriptions became harder to ignore as well. Before starting a trial, I wrote the cancellation date on my calendar, and before adding a monthly service, I asked which existing expense it would replace. This prevented my budget from slowly filling with small commitments that seemed harmless at first. Even conversations with family became easier because I could speak from clear numbers instead of vague anxiety. When someone suggested an outing, gift, or extra expense, I did not have to say no automatically. I could look at what was available and make a decision based on the current week. Sometimes the answer was yes, sometimes it was not right now, and sometimes we found a less expensive option. The difference was that I no longer felt surprised by my own limits. I had already reviewed them. One of the biggest changes was the reduction in decision fatigue. Before the reset, every purchase required a new internal debate. Could I afford this? Had I spent too much? Was there a bill I was forgetting? And would I regret it later because I did not know the answers? Even small decisions felt stressful. But once I had reviewed the accounts and upcoming expenses, the boundaries were clearer. I knew what was safe to spend, what needed to remain untouched, and which category required caution. That clarity made it easier to enjoy the money I had intentionally set aside. Budgeting no longer meant feeling guilty every time I spent. It meant knowing the difference between planned spending and financial drift. I also noticed that the reset made me more patient. Instead of solving every need with a purchase, I looked for what I already had, borrowed an item, repaired something, waited for the right time, or decided the problem was not important enough to solve at all. Some of my best savings came from realizing I could live comfortably without buying the thing I had almost convinced myself I needed. None of these changes felt dramatic from one day to the next, but together they created a new rhythm. I planned a little earlier, paused a little longer, and noticed a little more. The routine did not depend on constant self-control. It simply placed a moment of awareness between the impulse and the purchase, and that small space gave me the chance to choose. Over time, those choices became more natural, and 15 minutes on Sunday began protecting my money during every other day of the week. But the real test came when an expense appeared that could not be delayed, avoided, or solved by better planning. The real test of my 15-minute money reset came during a week when the numbers simply did not work. The car began making a strange sound on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday, I was standing in a repair shop, listening to a mechanic explain that the problem could not safely be ignored. The bill was not catastrophic, but it was large enough to disrupt the careful plan I had made for the month. In the past, an expense like that would have sent me into one of two reactions. I would either panic and start mentally canceling everything, or I would put the repair on a credit card, avoid looking at the balance, and promise myself I would deal with it later. Neither response made the expense disappear. They only added fear, interest, and confusion to an already difficult situation. This time, I knew I had a reset scheduled for Sunday, and instead of waiting until then while worrying about the damage, I opened my notebook that evening and did a shorter version of the routine. I checked the accounts, reviewed what was due before the next paycheck, looked at the categories that still had money available, and asked one question: What can I adjust without creating a new problem? I had some money in a car repair sinking fund, but not enough to cover the full bill. At first, that disappointed me because I felt as though the fund had failed. Then I reminded myself that having part of the money was still better than having none of it. The sinking fund reduced the amount I needed to find elsewhere, and that mattered. I moved a small amount from the household category because the purchase I had planned could wait. I paused restaurant spending for the rest of the month, reduced the amount going toward an optional savings goal for one pay period, and used the car fund for the remaining balance. No single adjustment solved the problem, but several small adjustments worked together, and within 15 minutes, the repair had a plan. The experience taught me that flexibility is not the same as failure. I had once believed that changing a budget meant I had lacked discipline, but a budget that cannot respond to reality is not a useful budget. It is only a wish. Unexpected expenses do not ask whether the timing is convenient, and even well-planned months can be disrupted by repairs, medical appointments, family needs, higher utility bills, or something in the home suddenly breaking. The purpose of the reset was not to prevent every surprise. It was to help me respond before the surprise created a chain of additional problems. During another month, the electricity bill arrived much higher than expected. After a period of unusually hot weather, the increase was not large enough to qualify as an emergency, but it was enough to cause an overdraft if I continued spending according to the original plan. Because I saw it during the weekly review, I transferred the money early, adjusted the grocery plan, and delayed a personal purchase. The bill was paid without a fee, without using credit, and without spending several days, wondering whether enough money would remain in the account. That kind of correction may sound ordinary, but ordinary corrections were exactly what had been missing from my financial life. I had spent years allowing small problems to grow because I did not want to admit that the plan had changed. Now, I understood that the sooner I faced the new numbers, the more choices I still had. Waiting reduced my options, while attention created them. The reset also helped me separate a true need from a feeling of urgency. When an unexpected expense appeared, I asked whether it had to be paid immediately, whether the amount could be negotiated, whether there was a payment plan without interest, whether I could use a sinking fund, and whether another expense could safely be delayed. Sometimes the answer was simple. Other times I needed to call a company, compare prices, or ask more questions before agreeing to the first solution. This prevented panic from making the decision for me. I also created a rule that I would not raid every savings account to protect a perfect monthly budget. Long-term goals mattered, but so did keeping the current month stable. I could temporarily reduce a contribution without abandoning the goal, then restore it when the situation passed. This was far healthier than charging the expense and spending months paying interest. Simply because I refused to adjust the plan, there were still moments when I felt frustrated, especially when money I had hoped to save had to cover something unexciting. But I began seeing that as part of what savings was designed to do, financial progress was not only watching account balances rise, it was also being able to absorb a difficult week without turning it into a difficult year. The 15-minute reset gave me a calm place to make those decisions. It replaced the question, how did everything go wrong? With a better question, what is the next useful move? And each time I answered that question, the situation became smaller, clearer, and more manageable. I stopped expecting every month to unfold perfectly and started trusting that I could adjust when it did not. That trust became one of the most valuable results of the routine, because after several months, I was not only catching budget leaks, I was building a financial system that could bend under pressure without breaking. After several months of repeating the 15-minute money reset, the results began showing up in quiet ways. There was no dramatic overnight transformation, no sudden windfall, and no single month when everything became perfect. Instead, Small improvements started stacking on top of one another. I stopped paying late fees because upcoming bills were no longer surprises. I avoided overdrafts because I checked the account before the balance became dangerously low. I canceled subscriptions before they renewed, used more of the food already in my kitchen, and caught unusual charges. While they were still easy to question, none of these changes seemed life-changing by itself. But together they created something I had not felt in years: breathing room. At the end of the month, there was often a little more money remaining than I expected, and instead of allowing it to disappear into random spending, I gave it a purpose. Some went into my 1-month buffer. Some strengthened the sinking funds for car repairs, home expenses, and medical costs, and some allowed me to make extra payments toward debt. The amounts were not always large. Sometimes I moved only $10 or $20, but the habit of moving money intentionally mattered more than the size of any single transfer. I was teaching myself that every small amount could protect the future instead of being forgotten in the present. My grocery spending became more predictable because I understood the patterns behind it. I noticed that certain weeks were expensive because I bought too many ingredients for ambitious meals, while other weeks became costly because I had not planned enough and relied on takeout. Once I saw that pattern, I began choosing simpler meals, rotating familiar dinners, and shopping around what I already owned. The savings came not from eating less or buying the cheapest possible food, but from reducing waste and making the plan more realistic. Credit card use also became less automatic. Before the reset, I sometimes used the card because I was uncertain about how much money remained in checking, then worried about the balance later. But the weekly review gave me a clearer picture. I knew which expenses could be paid directly, which ones needed to wait, and whether a future bill required me to protect the cash already in the account. When I did use the card, it was more often a deliberate choice with a repayment plan, rather than a way to avoid an uncomfortable number. The emotional results were even more important than the financial ones. I stopped feeling nervous every time I opened the banking app. The numbers were not always what I wanted to see, but they no longer felt mysterious. I knew where the money had gone, what was coming next, and which adjustment I could make. That knowledge reduced the background anxiety I had carried for years. I had not realized how much energy I was spending trying to remember whether a bill had been paid, wondering if I had overspent, or fearing that an expense I had forgotten would suddenly appear. The reset moved those worries out of my head and onto a simple page where I could deal with them. It also revealed the emotional reasons behind some of my spending. I noticed that I ordered food more often when I felt overwhelmed, browsed online shops when I was bored, and bought small household items when I wanted the satisfaction of feeling productive. Understanding those patterns did not make them disappear immediately, but it gave me alternatives. On stressful days, I could choose an easy meal from the freezer. When I felt bored, I could go for a walk or finish a project I had already started. And when I wanted the feeling of improvement, I could organize something I already owned instead of buying another solution. Perhaps the biggest change was that I began trusting myself with money again. Financial confidence did not come from never making mistakes. It came from knowing I would notice them, correct them, and keep going. One expensive week no longer convinced me that the entire budget had failed. One impulse purchase did not become an excuse to give up for the rest of the month. The reset gave me a place to return, a regular point where I could start again without waiting for a new month, a new year, or a sudden burst of motivation. After a while, Sunday evenings stopped feeling like a financial inspection and started feeling like an act of care for my future self. I was spending 15 minutes making the coming week easier, protecting money from unnecessary leaks, and reminding myself what mattered most. At 52, I had finally learned that financial stability was not built only through big sacrifices or perfect decisions. It was built through ordinary attention, repeated often enough to change the direction of my life. And the best part was that anyone could begin the same habit with nothing more than a timer, a bank account, and 5 simple questions. If you want to begin your own 15-minute money reset, you do not need to wait for the first day of a new month, new paycheck, or the moment when your finances finally feel organized. Start with the accounts and habits you have today. Choose one day of the week when you are usually able to sit quietly for a few minutes. Set a timer for 15 minutes and answer 5 simple questions. What did I spend during the past week? What expenses are coming before my next reset? Is there anything unusual in my accounts? What part of the budget needs adjusting? And what is one useful action I can take right now? Those 5 questions are enough to bring your money back into focus. You do not need to analyze every decision or build a perfect financial plan during the first session. The goal is simply to notice what is happening while you still have time to respond. Begin by checking your account balances and recent transactions. Recognize each charge. Look for fees, renewals, duplicate purchases, or anything you had forgotten. Then, look ahead at the next 7 days. Check your calendar, recurring bills, appointments, grocery needs, transportation costs, birthdays, and any event that could require money. Compare those needs with what remains available and make one small correction. Perhaps you need to move money before a bill is withdrawn, cancel a subscription, cook from the freezer, postpone an online order, return an item, or place $10 into a sinking fund. Do not underestimate the power of that one action. Financial problems often grow because we see them but delay responding. The reset closes the distance between awareness and action, and that is where much of its value comes from. During your first few weeks, you may discover things that make you uncomfortable. You might notice how much you spent on convenience, how many subscriptions you forgot, or how often small purchases appeared when you felt tired or stressed. Resist the temptation to turn that information into criticism. Shame will only make you want to stop looking. Treat the reset as a conversation with yourself rather than a judgment. Ask what created the pattern and what would make the next week easier. Perhaps you need simpler meals, a shopping list, automatic reminders, a separate account for bills, or a small amount of planned spending so you do not feel restricted. The best system is not the strictest one. It is the one you can continue using when life becomes busy. That is why the timer matters. When the 15 minutes end, stop. You can write down anything that requires more attention and return to it later. But do not let the weekly reset become another exhausting financial project. It should feel like a quick piece of maintenance, similar to checking the fuel in your car before beginning a long drive. Some weeks you will find a leak, other weeks everything will be on track, and both results are useful. Consistency matters more than drama. After 4 weeks, look back at what you caught, add up the subscriptions canceled, fees avoided, purchases delayed, and money redirected. The total may surprise you, but even when the amount is small, pay attention to the change in how you feel. You may notice less anxiety when opening your banking app, fewer surprises near the end of the month, and more confidence when deciding whether you can afford something. That confidence does not come from having unlimited money. It comes from knowing your numbers and trusting yourself to respond when they change. At 52, I stopped searching for the perfect budget and started building a habit of paying it attention. The 15-minute reset worked because it accepted that real life would never follow a plan exactly. Groceries would cost more some weeks, repairs would happen, emotions would influence decisions, and unexpected needs would appear. But instead of allowing those changes to quietly destroy the month, I had a regular place to adjust. Every Sunday I could return to the plan, correct the direction, and begin again. That simple opportunity to begin again may be the most powerful part of the routine. You do not have to wait until next month after one mistake. You do not have to give up because one category went over budget, and you do not have to solve your entire financial future in a single afternoon. You only need to make the next useful decision. Then return the following week and make another one. Financial stability is often built in moments that look too small to matter. Checking a charge, moving $20, using what is already in the pantry, saying no to one automatic renewal, or delaying a purchase for one day. But when those moments repeat, they begin changing the shape of your life. My 15-minute money reset did not make me perfect with money. It made me present. It caught the leaks before they emptied the account, helped me prepare before bills arrived, and reminded me that I still had choices. So choose your day, set the timer, answer the 5 questions, and try the reset for the next 4 weeks. Then ask yourself what disappeared from your budget when you finally started looking. Because the money you need may not always be missing, some of it may simply be escaping through small leaks that 15 quiet minutes can finally help you close.